We have a really busy week next week, so lots more free food. We have partly a follow-up to this on Tuesday, 12:30 during the lunch block in this room as well. We have one of our CS alums, Karen Benson. She graduated with a CS major, graduated in 2006, and she's coming to talk about her graduate school experiences. She did a master's program at Johns Hopkins University and was in information security, and she worked for the U.S. Army Research Lab while she was a master's student, and now she's in a PhD program at UC San Diego. Also, this is actually in the field of internet measurement. So she's a current, graduate student right now in computer science, and so this is going to be an informal sort of, talk about what she does and her experiences and stuff. So that will be Tuesday during the lunch block. Then you've probably also seen these flyers around if you're interested in community outreach and getting involved in the computer clubhouse in Boston. The woman who's director of the whole Intel Computer Clubhouse program, as well as the coordinator for the Boston Computer Clubhouse, will be talking. This is late Tuesday afternoon during our common block over in Pendleton. You'll see the information here, but if you're interested in that, kind of like getting involved with inner city schools and teaching computer skills and stuff to inner city kids, this is a really great opportunity. And then on Thursday, late in the afternoon, we have two people, Craig Ulmer and Miriam Kunkel, coming from the Louisiana State University and talking about kind of the bridge between computational genomics and human-computer interaction. So they're going to be, they've been invited by the HCI group here. So those are our various activities coming up. And now I'm just very happy to welcome okay, Truth in Advertising. This is my husband. He's on the table here. But anyways.
I'm still glad you're happy to have me here. That's
nice. So we have Chancellor Eric Grimson from MIT. And in case you're wondering, what does it mean to be a chancellor? I looked it up in the dictionary. It said, the secretary of a nobleman, prince, or king. So, but at MIT, it's come to mean the person who oversees everything related to students. So everything from academic programs to student life, undergraduates, graduate students, all that, is on the plate of the chancellor. And before becoming chancellor, Professor Grimson was head of the Department of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at MIT. And for many years before being head, he served on the Graduate Admissions Committee. So he has that, kind of perspective on students, coming in and being considered for graduate school. And he's also advised many undergraduates and graduate students over the years. He recently graduated his 48th PhD student, and that includes one of our alums, Lily Lee, who was, I think, class of '92, I believe. She was a CS major, worked with Eric. And he's also had a number of students from Mount Holyoke College, working in his research group. And today, he's come to just have a conversation with us about computer science graduate school. And I asked him first to give a few remarks about why one would, consider doing graduate work in computer science, and then we're just going to open it up to questions from you. And so,
great.
Without further ado, let's go.
Thank you. So, just before I do start, two things. One is it's interesting to observe that Wellesley classes are like MIT classes. Everybody sits at the back of the room. I took a shower this morning. I'm not quite certain, but here I am. And as Ellen said, that as chancellor, it's a very different title. It means something different in different places. And I often start by pointing out that in Europe it means something very different. In Europe, the equivalent of the president of the university is the vice chancellor, and the chancellor is this higher figure. And if you think about it, both Cambridges have a chancellor. I happen to be the chancellor in this Cambridge, I'm not in Wellesley, but in the Cambridge here. University of Cambridge has a chancellor, and if you don't know, at least up until recently, that chancellor was the Duke of Edinburgh. And when I pointed out to the president at MIT that the other chancellor's housing allowance was a whole lot bigger than mine, I was told to suck it up. So I'd like to just mostly I will ask questions if you don't. I mostly just like to have a Q&A, but I thought Ellen had suggested some of the questions, but I thought I would start just my thoughts, my perspective, we've got other faculty here who jump in, but why might you consider going to grad school? And I'm going to try to start by giving you at least one sense of where things are different between being an undergrad and being a grad student. In my mind, undergraduate education teaches you knowledge, it teaches you some transferable skills. Those are really important. Transferable skills means ways of thinking, modes of thinking, what are sometimes called the soft skills. I hate that word, they're really valuable skills. But I think if you think about it, you probably will realize that most of the things you take in the classes here essentially are focused on training you to solve well-structured problems well. So problem sets are. Faculty members thought hard about creating a problem that has a structure, there is a likely solution or set of solutions to it, and you are building skills to deal with well-structured problems. If you are fortunate, you may do the occasional open-ended project. You start somewhere, but it doesn't define where you end up. But you're probably not going to see very many open-started projects. I think to me that's the transition to a graduate program. In a graduate program, good graduate program will train you, will give you skills to be able to take an unstructured problem and figure out how to put structure around it, how to map it into something where you can actually figure out what's the question I want to ask. The question may not be there, and you're getting the training, the experience, and how do I put structure on it so I can actually figure out what I want to ask and how I might solve it. And that means you learn things like how to abstract away things that are not essential to the problem, how to put some software engineering turns some stubs around issues so you can focus in on the pieces you want. And it also gives you, I think, a lot of experience in project management. And that sounds fun. You know, wait a minute, I'm not in an MBA program, but project management are things like time management, setting priorities, setting agendas, being able to know when to walk away and say, this is not working and it's time to move on to something else, how to do assessment in an unstructured setting. So it's really about taking the open-ended things, or open-started things, and putting structure around it as well. I think a good graduate program gives you. Which, by the way, is why, aside from sort of what are sometimes called terminal master's programs, typically a graduate program will have very little coursework. A good graduate program will say, you need to know a little, something about 3 or 4 areas, but you may only have to take, at MIT, the course requirements for a PhD are 4. It's only 4 courses you take. You spend most of your time working in the lab, doing research and focusing on those. And so, I guess I would sort of capture it by saying, one way to think about this is if you're really interested in product development, which is a great area, frankly, I wouldn't suggest going to grad school. Nothing wrong with going and get good masters in that, but Google, Facebook, Microsoft, they will grab you now if you want to be on the product development side, because they want people with strong programming skills, ability to think abstractly, analytically, but they're going to define the specs of the product, and you're going to basically build it. On the other hand, if you really get intrigued by seeing that new thing, defining that new thing, discovering something that nobody else has seen before, finding an algorithmic solution that improves the complexity by a factor, taking problems that don't have a clear answer and figuring out what the answer is, then grad school is great, because that's really what you'll experience. I think the last thing I'd say is, sometimes people ask this in terms of finances. Is it worthwhile to do it? Because you'll spend time doing this, not in the job market already. And I guess, I would say, especially for a PhD, no question it adds to your economic power. You come out and you're much more likely to move into a mid-level position, Facebook and Microsoft and Google will pick those 3, pick your favorite versions of this. I know from MIT's perspective, they will grab somebody with a PhD and slot them into being in charge of the group because they figure they've got those skills already. And obviously, concomitantly, the salary tends to be different. But I would also say most people don't go to graduate school because they're trying to increase their salary power. They're going to grad school because they're excited about it. And I think that's probably the best way to finish this, which is, one of the ways to think about it is, if you go to one of the strong schools, I'm sure you will, average length of time for a PhD at MIT, if you come in with a bachelor's in computer science, is 5.5 years. It can be done faster. If you're in theory, you'll do it faster. If you're in experimental stuff, it'll take you a little longer. That's 5.5 years. It's a great time, but you need to be really passionate and excited about what you're doing, or why in the world would you hang out at MIT or Berkeley or Stanford or Carnegie or whatever you like for 5 years. You do it because you're excited about what you're doing. There are a whole bunch of other questions that Ellen passed on, but I'm just going to stop. I'm here to answer questions. It can be big questions, small questions. There are no dumb questions. So, and since I know no names except for the faculty, and I'm not going to bug them, go ahead, please.
So earlier you had mentioned that if you go to grad school, you could, like, there's a situation where you go immediately into like a higher level position at the firm. So arguably, if you go into the firm in the beginning, it's likely that in that time frame you'll also learn the skills that will get you to that place. So my question is, what are the different kinds of skills and the skill sets that you'll gain from grad school that you might not get from industry?
Right, so you're raising a good point, which is if you don't spend the 5 years and you just start at one of these places, do you end up at that place? You may, if you have the skill set. But it's also equally likely that you'll get slotted into a production group and be successful in it, but often the rise internally is slower than somebody who comes in from the outside. So you may get there. But in terms of what do you gain at grad school that you wouldn't just gain if you just went straight to work for, let's pick Facebook, it's probably the most popular one right now. I think the things that you gain, in my mind, are skills that are both valuable and very transferable. So what are those? Communication. How to take an unstructured thing and describe it in a way where you can explain it to somebody else. Cooperation. Most grad programs that I know involve these days a lot more interaction between students than they did when I was a grad student, when it tended to be just a single student. And that wasn't completely true. I was in a great group that had a lot of collaboration, but it tends to be cooperation, communication, again, management of figuring out how to break something down into pieces and get them done. And that's really valuable even if you come into a firm where you're now saying, okay, you're in charge of that, and you're in charge of that, and you're in charge of that, and I'm going to pull it together. You can get it if you go straight into a company, and good companies will try and foster that. But I think that's one of the things I think you really get at grad school is essentially how to set the agenda yourself. And I think I keep coming back, but I'll make that distinction. If you're really excited about new things, innovation, design, new research, that's where grad school is great. If you're really keen to build the next Zynga game. I don't know, I need a better example than Zynga, but I don't play it. But something that fits into a standard setting, go and work because you'll have a great time doing it. But you're likely to be still doing that 5 years from now, rather than actually having an ability to move more broadly. Other questions? Yes?
Would you suggest that students from Wellesley go immediately to grad programs, or should they do a couple of years in industry?
That's a great question. And when I say that, it's because I'm stalling to think about the answer. It is a great question. I'm going to give you several pieces here, and I will do this partly just knowing the perspective of seeing applications at MIT, which, as Ellen said, I did for about 25 years before I got sidetracked into other things. There is a window that closes fairly rapidly. So what do I mean by that? If you go and work for a year, 2 years, you still have a good opportunity to come back into a strong graduate program. Much beyond 2 years, and the graduate programs are going to be cautious about it. And so why cautious? A couple of reasons. One is, if you've been out earning real money for a couple of years, you've changed your lifestyle, you're now making a commitment to come back and being a poor grad student. Come in a second to finances, but it's a change of lifestyle that the grad programs, strong grad programs, that tend to be a little cautious. Are you really committed to doing this? Okay. 5 years out, definitely very hard. Now, there are always exceptions. When I was a younger faculty member, so I'd say younger, when I was, when I was in my late 30s, I had a graduate student, 2 graduate students who were older than me, which was great because I felt very young, but they were really unusual people who can come back. That's very, very hard. 2, 3 years, okay, 5 years, my experience is hard. Now, part of the question you're asking is, do you gain something by working in the industry? And it depends on where. Okay, I mean, absolutely, we will see fairly regularly strong applications from people who have been out a couple of years where they've had an interesting experience, especially if it is something more than just being a code job. Sorry, bad term, but right. If you're involved with kayak, according to the paper this morning, just sold for $1.8 billion. You're involved for, you know, I mean, you're doing, it could be a startup, could be a small company, could even be a big company. As long as what you can point to is experiences that relate to that graduate experience, that you've learned something about a new problem area, you've done something that's created what you could think of a research, even if it's a paper, that's when it's valuable. If you spent a couple of years writing code, there's nothing wrong with writing code, but you know, you really, at the end of the day, there's not a lot you can show for it. Frankly, it will hurt you in your grad application because you know, you're now being compared to somebody who's 2 years younger than you, and they already have some research experience. So it's a long-winded way of saying there's no obvious answer. I think it really depends on the opportunity, but an opportunity where you're going to grow intellectually over that 1 or 2 years, absolutely. One of the other things that will hurt you, and this is a segue a little bit into an application, and again, I'm going to do it from the perspective of the place I know best, but I think it's true for many of the other top schools. If you go out and work in industry for a couple of years, you're going to get letters of recommendation from your employer. And in general, to be blunt, those letters aren't very helpful. That sounds weird. Let me tell you why. So let me give you a number, and this is not to scare you off, but last year, MIT's Computer Science half of EDCS, the admission rate for graduate applications was 4%. So 1 in 25. Still apply. You know, we still take great people, but the reason I say it is, if you think about that, Carnegie, Berkeley, Stanford are probably in that range. They may be 8 to 10%, but the top schools, it's competitive. The problem that an admissions group has in that situation is you're trying to separate out the merely excellent from the spectacular. I'll repeat that term. We used to have that phrase, I hate to say it, we say, oh, there's another merely excellent candidate. That's really a terrible thing to say. My point is, if you think about this as a distribution, you're looking for the students that are 3 or 4 sigma out on the distribution. And what does that relate to the letter writer? Somebody at Microsoft, somebody at IBM, is likely to have seen people of that caliber and can write you a great letter that says, you know, I've had 30 interns from MIT and Carnegie, and this person's among the 3 best I've ever seen. That's great. Somebody at a smaller firm may well write you what looks like a spectacular letter, best student I've ever seen. And our problem is we don't know how many students on the tail of the distribution they've seen. Does that mean you're the best in 20 years or the best this year? And so it's kind of a brutal way of saying it, but a letter from a company tends not to help as much as a letter from an academic that's familiar with the academic setting. So my point is, the longer you're away from Wellesley, I'm sure the faculty will remember you because it's a nice small department, but the longer you're away, the less ties you have with the faculty member. And replacing those letters with an industrial letter tends not to help as much as you'd like.
So it's a question of the qualifiers that people use in their letters.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I'll say I've seen letters from companies where the letter writer gets it and will spend the first paragraph saying, I did my PhD at Berkeley. I work with so-and-so, I've had this many interns from those companies. They calibrate so that they help you understand the letter, and that can be really helpful. And part of the reason I say it is I've seen what look like great candidates that have gone and worked for a startup for a couple of years. It can be a lot of fun, and if the startup is really exciting, that's a great experience. But the letter is often just, to use an old EE term, it's a no-op. Just, it doesn't help because you just don't know how to calibrate the letter. By the way, I would also say, in case this is worrying you, the strong computer science departments, certainly the ones on the East Coast, are very familiar with places like Wellesley. Wellesley, Mount as Alan said, I've had 4 students, 3 from Mount Holyoke, 1 from Wellesley. I don't know how visible you are in the West Coast. I don't know if one of the faculty can help. I think Stanford may not, you just may not be as visible. But the really strong liberal arts colleges, the top schools know about. I know all about Harvey Mudd, great engineering school. So I don't want you to feel like you're at a disadvantage. Yeah.
You mentioned the issue of professors may not remember you as well 2-3 years out. It's not a crazy idea if you know you're going to go to grad school to ask for a letter before you leave, even if you're not going to send it yet.
Absolutely right. It's a great point, because that is a time when they can talk strongly about what you've done, your minds. And again, I certainly remember. I know folks here as well. You'll remember students 2 or 3 years out, but it's not. You don't have the same connection 3 years later. Whereas writing it right after you graduate or as you graduate is a great point. Great suggestion. Other questions? Be careful. I start asking questions and people don't know.
So your grades are really important in high school to get into Wellesley, but what if you're going from Wellesley to grad school? Are grades really important? Is your research experience important? What counts the most?
Absolutely great question. I'll tell you what we always look for when I ran admissions, and I'm pretty sure the committee still looks for as well. So let me start with, well, let me just walk through them. GREs, we don't care. In fact, we don't even ask for it. MIT does not ask for it. Some schools do, but the reason, and it's not that we're MIT, we're known to be arrogant, but the reason we don't ask for it is because we think that your performance on one day is not a good indicator of what you can do. And you've all had that experience. You have a bad day because you were up way too late the night before. So we don't even ask for GREs. I know Stanford still does, but we don't care. Grades, I would say, the top level bit, and then I'll do the second level bit. The top level bit is, it's more a filter than anything else. So MIT's on a 5-point scale, so I'll map it into there. For us, the difference between a 5.0 and a 4.5 doesn't matter. A 3.5, we're going to worry about. And I'd really say it that way, is we want to know that you can handle material well, but we also understand there are lots of factors that can contribute. So really that difference between, as I said, a 5 and a 4.5, we don't care. What we often care about is actually what courses have you done and how have you done those. So if you get, hope I'm far enough away from the arts part of it or humanities part of the institute here, if you get some Bs in literature and foreign languages, well, I'm sure your parents wish you did better, but you know what? We don't really worry about it. If you get Bs in math courses, it concerns us. On the other hand, if you do strong in math courses, physics courses, if you're on that side of it, like in architecture, and especially in upper class courses, that's what really matters for us. So it's like saying a long but it's really a filter more than anything else. And we will look, by the way, at where the grades are. The committee means multiple people will look at a folder. We'll look at the courses to see what have you done. What textbooks did you use? It helps us calibrate courses if you're coming from a place you're not familiar with. So grades are, so GREs you don't care about. Grades are really a filter more than anything else. The two things that we look at most carefully are the letters of recommendation. I want to come back to that, and your statement. So let me start with the statement. Tell us about what gets you excited. Don't recite your CV. We can read your CV, your resume. Don't recite all the awards you've won. That's great. But we want to know, what is it that you're excited about? What's the area you want to work in? We don't expect you to know the title of your thesis before you come. The second week of the term. But we want to have a sense of the area you want to work in and why you want to do it. And we go back to thinking about it. If it's a 5-year commitment, why are you going to slug it through for 5 years? What is it that gets you really excited that says, I want to do this? So tell us, that statement is really important about you telling us about what you want to do, the areas you want to work in. If you know faculty members at the institution with whom you think you'd be a good fit, mention them. You don't have to make contact with them ahead of time, by the way. In fact, please don't make contact with them ahead of time. We get inundated with notes, mostly from overseas, and I have to tell you, I just automatically fire them off to the admissions secretary because I just don't look at them. Because decisions aren't made by faculty members at strong schools, they're made by a committee. But do say, if you say, I'm really interested in computer vision, and Professor Freeman and Professor Taralba and Professor Golden, just to pick the three that I I've seen their work, I'm really excited about that. Says you've done your homework, it really helps. Tell us what you're excited about, that's what really helps. And when I said don't recite your CV, don't, but do tell us about any research project on which you've had an opportunity to participate. That could be in a company, it could be a summer internship, it can even be in a class here. But tell us about something where you've done some research, because that's what we're looking for is, are you familiar enough with the research experience if you know what you're getting into? Right? The letters. I think the easiest piece of advice I can give you is, and one of the advantages you have is because Wellesley is a nice sized department. So I'm saying that coming from a department that's got 800 doctoral students and 900 undergraduates. You're a nice sized department. I love to be in a department like this. The reason I'm saying it is I know that the faculty members here will know you well, but I'll still give you the analogy. If you have a choice of getting a letter from a very famous person who knows you a little bit, you've taken a class from, or a letter from somebody who knows you really well, take the second. Because a letter from a Nobel laureate who says, so-and-so was in my class, I think I remember her. I'm overstating, right? But you know, they're not going to use the superlatives that are going to really make a difference. They're basically going to say, yeah, I've seen this student, it seemed like a sharp student. It doesn't tell us anything. Somebody who knows you well will talk about, this is the best student I've had in the last 10 years. And the other student that I had in the last 10 years that was as good got a PhD out of Carnegie Mellon. I mean, those are the kinds of things that really make a difference. So I would encourage you, find the letter writers from people that you think really know you well. You've done a project with them, you've had multiple classes from them. And by the way, you ought to feel, now faculty will throw things at me, but you ought to feel comfortable, in my mind, asking the person, are you comfortable writing the letter? And I will tell you this from my own, I've had times when I've quite honestly said to a student, look, I'm perfectly happy to write a letter for you, but I think you can probably get stronger letters elsewhere. And it's a polite way of saying, I'm going to say good things, but I can't rave about it, either because I don't know you well enough, or, to be blunt, I've had stronger students. So I'm looking at Randy. I'm sure, Randy, you've done this, right? And I'm sure you do it much more smoothly than I do. But you know, you can gently say, you know, you might think about somebody else. You ought to feel comfortable. I mean, you're making a contract with that letter writer. My advice to you is you ought to feel comfortable basically saying, you know, I'd like to ask you for a letter, but if you're not comfortable and you don't feel you can write me a strong letter, you know, I'm fine with that because you're better off getting a letter from somebody who knows you really well. Other questions? Yes? I'll go to the back. You get to wait. I'll go to the back. Yes, please.
What are some examples of projects that students who are CS grad students would do, like as opposed to, for example, like a human-centered interaction grad student or a media arts and sciences grad student?
What do you mean, as a PhD project? Or?
Yeah, or master's, or
okay.
just...
Boy, I guess I don't see boundaries between those areas. You know, I think that one fluidly flows into another. And you know, go to the example, because you may well have some familiarity with MIT. I mean, yes, there is CSAIL, which is the giant computer science lab, and there's media arts, or media lab, media arts and sciences. It's hard to draw the boundary between what's in one lab and another, and people frequently get confused and they assume they're from a different lab. So the reason I'm saying, and then I'll let you refine the question, is I'll give you examples of them. But, you know, my point is I think at a strong school you can do a project in almost any area of computer science, within computer science. So let me give you some examples. If you're a theory student, you're interested in computer theory, the tradition, and I know where's Talk, because you can help me out on this one around here, both know this, but I think the tradition still in theory is that a PhD in theory tends to be 3 or 4 papers stapled together. It's not quite right. Usually they write a little bit of blending between them. But
focus and a scope.
Yes, yeah. And the typical thing is that you will get 3 or 4 conference papers, a Fox paper, a stock paper, you know. And one of the advantages is I know at MIT many of the theory students will work with different faculty. So they might do one project with Eric Grimson and another project with Piotr Indyk and another project with Ronit Rubenfeld. And that's actually really nice because you build collaboration. So it tends to be smaller size but nice deep projects. And that can be anything from building a new data structure to do really efficient hashing for massive size databases to a new encryption system. You go work with Ron Revest of RSA Security and you build a new encryption system for for cryptography, to geometric algorithms. So it tends to be small-sized things like that. If you're interested in communication and networks, it can be everything from new coding schemes to new protocols to actually new physical devices for actually doing encoding, to policy issues. We've seen great theses from students dealing with policy issues. An example I'll give you is one of the hot areas across a whole swath of MIT right now is game theory methods. So we've got EE people doing game theory, CS people doing game theory, economists doing game theory, and just tremendous activity around how do you use Nash equilibrium or game theoretic methods to design protocols for everything from transportation networks to social networks to standard communication networks. Your example, sort of HCI, there's some spectacular stuff, for example, goes on in the Media Lab, but I'd also say Rob Miller in CSAIL does fabulous things around crowdsourcing, around modeling social networks, around building both combinations of physical and virtual interfaces for dealing with new inputs. So the reason I'm saying all of this is I'll give you an example from MIT. I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the watch. I've got plenty of time.
Yeah.
Give you an example from MIT. Not every school does this, but again, I'm going to use MIT because it's a place I know well. With the exception of a couple of departments at MIT, the rule at MIT is if you're a PhD student, you can be supervised by any faculty member anywhere in the institute. And that's because we just don't think there are clear borders between things. So you could be admitted to the EECS department, but work with somebody from Media Lab, somebody from physics, somebody from economics. It's just very common. And I'll give you my example. When I was a PhD student, late 1800s. She was very young when we got married. But when I was a PhD student, I was in the math department. For accidental reasons, but my PhD was in the math department. I did all my work in what was then called the AI lab, which was a computer science lab, and my supervisor was a professor of psychology. And it was just a natural thing in terms of what I wanted to do, and that's still true, I think, at the top places. I know it's true at MIT. I'm pretty sure it's true at Berkeley. I see a lot of crossover at Berkeley in a similar way, and I think Stanford's that way. Carnegie, a little more structured, but most top places you've got that kind of thing. Does that answer your question, or you want to refine it?
I have a follow-up question, but I didn't answer my question. So for students who are more interdisciplinary by nature, like how do you decide which programs to apply to? Since there's like the CS option, the HCI option, there's like a lot of different options.
It's a great question. And so the answer there would be, in a big department, you just apply to the department. Okay, so if you apply to MIT, on the form, you'll get a spot to mark 2 or 3 areas on the form that you've got the areas you're interested in, and they'll get looked at by all of those. If you are trying to decide between media arts and sciences and EECS, apply to both. Each department does its own admissions. It's a little extra work, but you just apply to both. And that would be my advice in general. If you're not certain, just do the extra work and apply to the departments. Most schools will coordinate. In MIT, we do. We know if somebody's applied to 2 departments, and certainly had experiences. So my field was computer vision and medical imaging, and we fairly regularly get somebody who would apply both to brain and cognitive sciences because they were interested in sort of the human modeling side and to computer science. And we would always just coordinate and say, look, we're really interested in this person, but are you? Because we want to find the right person. So we just apply to both. Yeah, one more and then.
Sorry.
No, it's okay, keep going. One more and then I'll go to somebody else. Go.
So in that situation, would you recommend completely separate applications or applications that kind of relate to one another?
If you got things that you want to tune to that department, I would change your statement. So the obvious statement, if you write a letter, a statement where you talk about all the great research being done by the faculty in computer science, and you send exactly that to media arts and sciences, they're going to be a little annoyed at it. But in the rest of it, I would just write the same way. I mean, if you're talking about your strengths, your passions, presumably they cross those boundaries. So other than change the paragraph where you talk about the particular faculty, I frankly would use exactly the same application, because you're talking about yourself. You're not trying to tell the department what they want to hear. Just talk about yourself.
Yeah, I'm just wondering about what kind of mobility there is once you get into a graduate program. And this may vary from place to place, do you tend to be admitted with the expectation that you're going to work with a particular faculty member, or, do you get an opportunity to test the waters in different areas after you get there?
Absolutely. So, again, I'm going to think about the top places, just because I know them well. Carnegie is a little different than most of the other top 5 or top 10. They're more compartmentalized in my experience. In fact, they have the Machine Learning Institute, they've got the Robotics Institute, they've got the Software Engineering Institute, and you are usually admitted to that program. I mean, you're applying to the computer science department, but you're admitted into one. You do have some fluidity, but my experience at Carnegie is less than at some of the other places. Not meant as a negative on Carnegie, since you need to know what you're going into. It's a great school. At MIT, when we admit students, we admit them with an expectation of a group. We think you're a theory student, so we're expecting you to work with somebody in the theory group. We may try and do a little bit of a matchmaking up front in terms of who's going to start off. But our expectation is that you spend, in fact, we encourage students in the first term, we encourage you to go around and talk to people. In fact, faculty expect that you'll simply come in and say, I'm new, here's my background, I'm really interested in knowing what you've been working on, because we want to find the match. Second thing I say is at MIT, I'm sorry I keep doing that, but at MIT we do have in computer science a requirement of a master's thesis. It's a School of Engineering requirement. But it's really common for a student to do a master's with one person and then decide, I found a different area and switch. And 95% of the faculty are fine with that. We always have a few cranky people, but and I would, when I had a large group, I don't anymore, I would always after the master's say to a student, look, if you want to look around, it's great. I'm delighted to have you stay with me, but if you want to look around, it's great. I think in all the years I did it, I only had one move, which was nice, but the idea is that you ought to be able to explore. Again, it will depend a little bit on the place. Some of the smaller places, you're more likely to be targeted at a faculty member because your support may well be coming specifically from a grant associated with that faculty member. The big places, it's pretty fungible. You can always do some kind of forestry.
How is funding working, and how much should they worry about funding?
Yes, absolutely.
Not only at MIT, but in general.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was hoping somebody would ask that question because it's an obvious one. I'm going to give you the answer with the caveat that if we drive off the fiscal cliff, who knows? But the top places basically only admit as many students as they are confident they have funding for. And so MIT, for example, every student we admit in computer science, we guarantee the first year funding. We used to guarantee the first 4 years. We stopped, not because we don't fund them. The numbers are 98% of our students are funded. We stopped guaranteeing it because, for a reason I can get back to, but Stanford, same way. In fact, Stanford is able in computer science, I hate to admit this, but it's a great competition. Stanford, I believe, now can give a fellowship to every incoming first-year computer science student. And they can do it because they have this spin-off company named Google. That gave them they gave the computer science department a wonderful donation, $50 million, and they turned that into every, I believe it's still the case, every first-year student at CS gets a fellowship, which means they have the whole first year to look around. But Berkeley, Carnegie, Cornell, to my knowledge, they're all the same. They only admit as many students as they have funding for. And I wanted to really stress that because, my advice to you is do not worry about the funding. If you get into a strong school, they will figure it out for you. Most of the strong schools also will ask you at some point to serve as a TA, but usually not in your first year, because we want you to get engaged. Your second or third year, we think is good experience for you, but you don't have to worry about, I'm going to have a TA and it's really rare for a student to support themselves purely by TA. Almost always it's fellowships. And the only reason I put the caveat, Takis, is just, all of us are worried about what's going to happen to federal funding. And if that does, if there is a crunch, my guess is that the schools will adapt to it by just narrowing the number of students they admit. Because we don't want to be in a situation of having 2 classes of students, those with and those without funding. So I would just really say do not worry about the funding. Standard fellowship from RA support from an institution will cover all of the tuition and stipend. It's not huge. It's about $2,200 a month now at MIT. I mean, it's enough to pay rent and food and those kinds of things. You're not going to live in Back Bay in a nice condo, but it's not why you're at MIT. You know, the idea is you don't have to worry about taking out additional loans. You should. Yeah.
But you mentioned that you accept students who already have a master, but Wellesley students are finishing with a bachelor, and so what do they have to do?
No, so you may have misunderstood me. I may have misspoken. Every student that's admitted to MIT must complete a master's. It's part of the process. We will take a few students that already have a master's. If they do, you don't have to do it again. And for MIT students to get into the graduate program, most of them will do our MEng program, so they have a master's. But no, we treat, so the master's, we like it to be done at the end of the third term. It can take as long as the fourth term. And it's a way for you to get experience with the research and understand that this is what you want to do. But you're not Wellesley students are not at a disadvantage if they're coming in after bachelor's. Not at all. Yeah?
What's funding different between master's students and PhD students?
The stipend's a little larger for PhD students. But it's exactly the same process. The way I would say it is, and I'm going to apologize for talking about the elite schools, but the strong schools are the places that I hope you aspire to. We can talk about some other great places in a second, but the top schools are basically admitting you to the PhD program. So at MIT, yes, we ask you to do a master's along the way, but we're expecting that you're doing a PhD. We don't have what's often called the terminal master's. I mean, the MEng is what is a very separate thing. It's only for MIT students. That's true again at the top 5. They admit to the PhD program, even if you have a master's that you have to do along the way. There are some schools that have masters aimed at students who only want that. That's a very different experience. So Stanford has a very good one, but it's a different admissions process. And I guess going back on the earlier questions, if you're not certain, you could apply to both. But most top schools, they admit to PhD programs. So funding just carries through all the way. And as I say, for us, at least after you get your master's, we increase the stipend. Lynn?
Can you talk about the reasons why you might want to choose a terminal master's program over some other program? And also, there are some schools that don't have a master's at all. They'll just admit you to a PhD, and that's the only thing you do.
Yeah.
Can you compare the different options?
Yeah, the terminal masters, I have to acknowledge, but I will acknowledge, I don't know them as well. I think, my perspective or my sense is students that do it, it's serving one of two purposes. One is you're really uncertain about whether grad school's for you or not, so it's a way to try something, but knowing that there's a clear endpoint. And I certainly have seen students that will do a terminal master's from Maryland or Penn or somewhere, and then decide, boy, this is really what I want to do, and apply to the PhD program. But I think a better answer, Lynn, is if you want to just strengthen your problem-solving skills. I hope all of you have had a chance to do a project here, and maybe even at MIT as part of Europe. I know that we do take Wellesley students. It's a great experience. The Europe experience is great, but it's small scale. And the master's gives you a year and a half, 2 years to do a large-scale project. And that's just great experience, and I think it goes back to one of the questions from the back of the room. It's great experience, in fact, if you decide that you are heading to industry, because you've at least had that experience of how do you structure a big problem, how do you break it up into chunks, how do you measure progress on it, those kinds of things. And a master's, no question, will jump you much higher into the food chain, so to speak, in terms of the kinds of jobs that but I have to admit, I haven't paid attention to the terminal master's programs. And again, think of the top 5. Stanford's the only one I can think of. If I'm wrong, somebody tell me. It's the only one I can think of that has a terminal master's. Berkeley is its PhD program. Carnegie, I'm pretty sure it's a PhD program. MIT it is. Cornell. Yep.
Given the competitiveness of getting into those top schools, students may well want to consider a spectrum of different kinds of schools that they apply to. And I know that things like the U.S. News and World Report tends to have rankings of graduate programs. And you also alluded that one thing that's important is seeing what faculty there are in these programs. Are there faculty in the area that you want to work on? And you kind of want to be familiar. I'm just wondering, what other kinds of factors students might want to look for in order to navigate that huge number of graduate schools out there, and what is the right one for me?
Yep, no, absolutely. Look, it's like what you did a few years ago when you applied to Wellesley. If you want to apply to a range of schools, you'd like to have it, I would encourage you to have a reach school, take a shot at a place that you think, boy, if I got in, it'd be great. Have some comfort schools, have a safety, and the safety ought to be out like you did when you were applying here, a place that you would be comfortable going to. You know, a PhD from a school that nobody's heard of doesn't help. But to answer your question better, you know, my perspective is if you look at rankings have lots of noise, and we always say we never look at them, but secretly we look at them all the time, especially when you're ranked one. My advice to you is, if you look at the U.S. News and World Report, I encourage you to look at two places, and then I'll amplify the question. The first one is, my perspective is the top 20 in that ranking, those are all really good schools. The top 4 or 5, they're a notch above in terms of the quality, but the next 10 to 15, they're, you know, Maryland, Penn, UCLA, Washington, Washington, St. Louis, just to pick some that I know are on that list, of Dartmouth, these are good schools. I mean, they tend to be a little more specialized, and that's what I do is the big places, look, MIT, it's an EECS department, so it's in some sense 2 or 3 departments together, but you know, it's 125 faculty members. And the advantage of that is you can pick virtually any area of computer science. There are probably 2 or 3 people there that do that. That's true. Stanford's small, there's about 35 faculty in CS. Berkeley's about 45, I think. Those places, you don't have to worry about this. They're all across the board, they're good. But, so the reason I'm saying is I would look at the top 20 and just look at places, what do you know about them. Come back in a second. But the second thing I would look at is you will see specialty rankings. There are rankings on AI, there are rankings on theory, there are rankings on systems. I think there are rankings on graphics. Look at those because you will see pockets. So I'll give you an example I happen to know. UMass Amherst. It's not top 20 CS department in AI. It's ranked very high because it has a tradition for a long time of having just some great people in natural language and in computer vision, and so it's up in that range. So look at the specialties and just look at, so what are the places that might be there. The other thing I would do is I would, if you got a school that you're interested in, go to their website, obvious statement, but look at where their faculty are from, because that's often a very good indicator of the quality of the program. You know, if their faculty are, if their PhD from an MIT or a Cornell, you know, or wherever, you know, this is a good sign that these are people with research experience. The last thing I would do is talk to the folks here. They'll often know people in places. So, you know, I gave you the example of UMass Amherst. You know, another one in my mind is Penn. Penn has a really good machine learning group. It's got Mike Kearns and among other people, some just really great people there. It's a good school overall. I wouldn't say it's, you know, it's a top 5. It's not a top 5 school, but you know, if you're interested in machine learning, that is a great place to go because it's just got a great group. And faculty here can help you out with that. You know, they know sort of who are the people.
Okay, now we have finished with admissions and we are into the graduate school. And I'm wondering what kind of issues and difficulties you can imagine somebody, you know, like one of our students. You know this place, you know the places out there. You know, how can you advise somebody from, you know, from our students to kind of brace themselves, to prepare themselves so they have an easier time, you know, into this new place?
Yep. So I think 2 parts to your questions. One is sort of what are the challenges you might face. I'll say a little bit about that, and then what can you do to prepare. So let's start with the challenges. The most common challenge, and it's not hugely common, but a student will face is collision with the supervisor. You're about to engage in a 4 or 5 year contract, in some sense, with the supervisor, and you need to be able to have good chemistry with them. And so every once in a while, the student they collide with the supervisor. And the good news is most of the good schools have mechanisms in place to help you deal with that. You go and talk to the graduate administrator, you go talk to the department head to find ways around it. But the reason I raise it is, look, the best thing you can do is just be able to advocate for yourself. And my experience, I'm a grand sample of 4, but having had 4 students that came out of one of the 7 sisters, I am incredibly impressed at just how poised all 4 of them were. I mean, I think this is one of the experiences you get here. You're in an environment where you have an opportunity to grow intellectually and socially in a way that I think really helps you. And so that's, again, maybe it's my 4, but I think we've seen that with other students from Wellesley, from Mount Holyoke. You come in with that extra confidence that I would really encourage you to use. The place where, and it was one of the questions here, so I'll address it, and it's kind of hidden in the question, Stella, is, so where are you at a disadvantage? And the answer is, with no disrespect to the great department, you don't typically have the same level of technical depth in advanced level courses that an MIT student, just to pick it, could have. And part of that is you don't have graduate courses here. An MIT student, a Stanford student, a good one is likely to have had an opportunity to take graduate courses in their senior year, and they just have a little more technical depth. A year into the program, you won't even notice the difference. Like you will start off just a little bit less strong, let's say, in technical. You'll do an algorithms course here. And I know it's a good algorithms course, but an MIT student is likely to have an advanced algorithm course from David Carter or Ron or Best. It's a small difference, but it is something that you'll see. And again, I would just encourage you, don't let it intimidate you. You'll do fine. Students do. You may just work a little harder that first year to fill in some background. And I really would say that's the biggest thing. My biggest advice is just be confident. We're running up on time here, so yeah.
That's actually a good note to end this part of it. So there's a class coming in here at 1:30, but Eric is going to be available. We're just going to maybe like move down to E1 101, so we're kind of out of the, we're not, going to miss anything.